Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
Now, as part of the fight against this global pandemic, researchers have been desperately trying to simply catalog how the virus works. But constant reports of potentially new symptoms have made this a very difficult task. And now we may know why. Apparently, the novel coronavirus has likely mutated into at least 30 different variations.
COVID-19, the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, it goes by many names, but maybe it needs a few more because according to a newly released study, it's mutating rapidly, and medical officials are still vastly underestimating it. The study was conducted by Chinese professor Li Lanzhuan from Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, and it's yet to be peer-reviewed. But in testing 11 randomly selected patients, over 30 mutations had been detected, 19 of which were totally new. And this variation is already being expressed in the symptoms of carriers, too. In some patients, typically children, purple and blue lesions on the feet, dubbed COVID toes, are now appearing. In China, there are new reports that the virus may live longer in the eyes than in other places, and that nasal swabs may test negative while eye swabs test positive. And in New York, an odd blood clotting issue has reared its ugly head, leading to a sharp increase in strokes amongst COVID patients.
We're still learning so much about COVID. We don't absolutely understand everything by far. Whether or not the clotting is a symptom of something fundamentally going wrong with the lining of the blood vessel, or whether the clotting is the primary thing, it's without doubt causing a lot of the problems we're seeing. We've even seen young patients who've shown up at the hospital where having a stroke was their first presenting symptom of having the COVID-19 disease. So it's certainly broad and profound.
So Li's team is now urgently advising health officials around the world to take region-specific mutations and variations into account when deciding on treatments and researching cures. Otherwise, he says we're likely to hit major pitfalls.
Now, life under lockdown isn't easy for anyone, and in a controversial move, the Israeli government has already begun to ease coronavirus restrictions in efforts to keep the economy afloat. But for some, it's still not enough.
Two top Haredi rabbis in Israel are now threatening drastic steps if yeshivas aren't opened soon. Israeli yeshivas, or Jewish ultra-Orthodox religious seminary schools, have served as major vector points for the coronavirus's spread. And now the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi neighborhoods of Jerusalem and Bnei Brak are among the hardest hit communities by the virus. Still, the two rabbis, Kanievsky and Edelstein, who have hundreds of thousands of followers, say that the study halls must be reopened or else. And while they aren't elaborating on the threat, many clashes with the police and health officials, sometimes even violent clashes, have already broken out over yeshiva and synagogue closures. Some Haredim are even donning yellow stars now, like those used in Hitler's Germany, in protest. Meanwhile, many secular Israeli parents and teachers are dealing with the schooling problems of their own. Parents and teachers alike are decrying distance learning programs as they've not been effective, and they're not equally accessible to all students either, especially with respect to households with several children and/or lower income. Also, many parents at home are not able to work properly if all the computers are taken up. So the Parents' Committee has asked that summer vacation in July be canceled and that students return to class in the first few weeks of August as well. The Teachers Union, on the other hand, says that it's already offered to extend the school year into summer vacation by 9 days, but that the Finance Ministry is now taking advantage of them by taking away summer vacation at the teachers' expense.
All right, now returning to the coronavirus, top health ministry official Professor Sigal Sadetsky warns that a second, more dangerous spike in infections will hit in May. Unless, of course, Israelis take social distancing more seriously. But luckily, it looks like Israel could have at least an early warning sign, and it's coming from our toilets. ILTV's Nittany Manson has the scoop.
That's right. Israel has now started to estimate the rate of COVID-19 infections on a society-wide scale by surveilling our sewage. And if the plan works out as intended, then the government would have an early alarm bell for sudden spikes in the virus. Currently, Israel is struggling to increase the number of daily coronavirus screenings, but even when testing upwards of 12,000 people per day, asymptomatic carriers are going unseen. And we now know that anywhere from 25 to 70% of virus carriers are asymptomatic. So according to the Health Ministry's Dr. Itai Bar-Or and media reports, we can simply test the amounts of virus shed in wastewater and predict how many people are infected regardless of symptoms. And apparently with initial tests showing very promising results, over a dozen teams around the world are trying out this same thing.
Moving on, Israeli Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Memorial Day, has now come to an end. And in the midst of the COVID pandemic, it's been marked with dozens of online survivor testimonies and ceremonies, including a totally virtual March of the Living. But several other religious and national holidays are coming up, and not everything can be done online.
The Muslim month-long holiday of Ramadan begins Thursday, April 23rd, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has already discussed regulations to keep coronavirus from taking advantage of the celebrations. Prayers in mosques are all set to be canceled, for example, and similar to Passover, evening iftar meals where Muslims break their daily fasts will be limited to the nuclear family. Likewise, a nightly lockdown or curfew may be established to maintain compliance. Then, in the first for the nation, the Israeli cabinet has announced that next week's Memorial Day and Independence Day will be quiet affairs as well. On Independence Day, there will likely be lockdowns, and the annual military flyovers and parties will all be canceled too. Then, normally on Memorial Day, nearly 1.5 million Israelis flock to the cemeteries. But explaining that this has the potential to be a coronavirus bomb, the cabinet is set to close all of the cemeteries and set up roadblocks along the way to them. That being said, Defense Minister Naftali Bennett says that while he hopes people will opt to stay home, quote, a bereaved father is not going to be physically stopped from visiting a cemetery on Memorial Day.
Finance Ministry has now taken special measures to return Israelis to work, and they'll be starting with the least damaged market, high-tech. But the high-tech startups may not be as eager to get back to the office as anticipated. Finance Ministry officials have been warning that if things don't get back to normal soon, the country is heading for an economic disaster. And the high-tech industry has been given priority not only because it's been the least affected by the shutdowns, but also because it's the financial powerhouse of the state and supports secondary employment. For example, the high-tech workers back in the office means more public transportation and work for cleaners, caterers, delivery services, etc. But if government officials are betting on the high-tech startups to just jump back into the swing of things as normal, they may be in for a rude awakening. High-tech was least affected because it's had the easiest overall transition to a remote working environment. And in fact, worker productivity has been largely unaffected by working at home. So employers, while understanding their responsibility to Israel's economic ecosystem, are not feeling pressured to leave the comfort of their couches just yet. Now, for most Israelis, restrictions around the coronavirus lockdown are slowly being lifted. But thousands are still in quarantine either at home, in the hospital, or in one of the many coronavirus hotels that have been established. But what is it actually like to live in one of these hotels? Well, ILTV sought to find out, and we enlisted the help of someone on the inside to get it done.
זה בעצם החדר של מלון דן. כאן יש לי את הארוחת בוקר שלקחתי. יש לי כאן שישייה של מים שהביאו לי שעדיין אפילו לא נגעתי בה. הבאתי מחשב מהבית, חברים הביאו לי אוכל, דברים כאלו. וזה בעצם הנוף שלי. קוראים לי מאי. אני חולה מספר 624. בעיקרון את הקורונה קיבלתי במסיבה בפורים. התסמינים אישית העיקריים שלי הם יותר קושי בנשימה, לחצים בחזה ובעיקר גם שיעול. אני לא מעשנת, אני לא עושה את הדברים האלו, ככה שבאמת הרגשתי שמשהו לא טוב. הייתי צריכה לריב איתם בשביל שהם יבואו לכאן, בשביל בכלל שהם יבואו לבדוק אותי בבית. באמת עשיתי את זה ורבתי איתם ועשיתי את הכל, ובסופו של דבר הם הגיעו לבדוק אותי אחרי 4 ימים באמת של עצבים והכל. קיבלתי טלפון שאני באמת חולה. החלטתי לקחת את המקום הזה דווקא למקום של וייב חיובי, כי קודם כל אם אתה כבר חולה אתה כבר לא יכול עוד פעם לחלות ואתה כבר חסין מהמחלה. דבר שני, אני יודעת שצדקתי באיזשהו מקום, כי באמת סוף סוף ידעתי שמישהו הקשיב לי ובאמת אני חולה וידעתי שמשהו לא תקין בי. הגעתי לבית חולים, היה לי שם רופאים, צוות רפואי מדהים, אין עליהם. הם לא רצו שאני אתפס מיטה, כי אני יחסית בסדר. והם לא רצו שאני אראה שם את כל המורדמים והמונשמים, כי באמת זה היה מצב נורא לא נעים. והוא פשוט אמר ב-12 בלילה, הצגתי לך הסעה למלון דן. המצב באמת כאן לא כזה נורא, כמו שמתארים. נכון, זה באופן של פיקוד צבאי, של פיקוד העורף. התנאים שלנו כאן ממש טובים. אין לנו כאן איזושהי בעיה. הצוות כאן נורא מקסים ואדיב ומדהים. אנחנו מעבירים כאן את הזמן, משחקים, מדברים, שטויות, דיבורים, ריחולים עד 4 בבוקר, באמת עושים כל מה שבאמת עכשיו היינו רוצים לעשות בבית, אבל נמנע מאיתנו לעשות. ואני באמת חושבת, לא צריך לעצור את החיים שלנו בגלל המחלה הזאת, כי זה משהו שבסופו של דבר זה יעבור, נכון? אמנם עכשיו אנחנו נחשבים כמצורעים וכלא טובים ודברים כאלו, אבל עוד טיפה בזה יעבור.
Now, a government coalition in Israel has finally been formed, and it only took 484 days, 3 election cycles, and a pandemic under an interim government to do it. But still, on the eve of this year's Israeli Holocaust Memorial Day, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Knesset Speaker Benny Gantz signed a deal, and many Israelis are, at the very least, relieved.
Of course, I'm happy. Any democratic would be happy that there's a new government. Will it be the right thing that I want? I'm not so sure. I'm not exactly the Bibi person. But at this challenging of COVID-19, which Israel is quite safely referring to it, I hope just that the next thing that the economy will start moving.
Now, this is the first unity government agreement in 36 years, the last one being between Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Shamir. According to this deal, though, this government will be characterized as an emergency government for 6 months, during which time negotiating teams will continue looking into the future of the coalition. No laws unrelated to coronavirus can be pushed by the emergency unity without both sides' consent, and only a few exceptions to this have been outlined, like the drafting of a 2-year budget and draft legislation to begin annexing sections of Judea and Samaria or the West Bank as soon as July. Apart from that, Prime Minister Netanyahu will stay in office for a year and a half, at which point Gantz will replace him. Until then, Gantz will serve as defense minister, but with prime minister status, and the Knesset speaker position will be passed back to the Likud, likely to Yariv Levin. As for Blue and White's new number 2, Gabi Ashkenazi, he will serve likely as foreign minister. Then in total, there will be at least 36 ministers and 16 deputy ministers to accommodate this big new government, which will be made of the Likud, the new Blue and White party, the Labour Party, and the Orthodox Shas and UTJ parties. Yamina, or Naftali Bennett's Right Party, on the other hand, is expected to sign on later, but it's unclear when or why.
At least 62% of the Israeli public supports the brand new Unity Coalition. This according to a brand new survey released by Israel's Channel 13 News.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Knesset Speaker Benny Gantz announced the signing of a deal just earlier this week, in line with earlier promises to form an emergency government against the coronavirus. And only 22% of Israelis are opposed. The poll shows that support is a bit skewed to one side, however, with 80% of Netanyahu's Likud party voters in support against just 57% of voters for Blue and White. And similarly, 41% of Israelis think that Netanyahu will break the rotation agreement. This does align with how half of Benny Gantz's Blue and White party split away to the opposition, though. They accuse Gantz of defrauding his voters and abandoning his policies in favor of sitting with an alleged criminal who will undermine the courts, referring to Netanyahu. And leading the charge is former Blue and White party number 2, Yair Lapid. Lapid is in line to take up the head of the opposition now, and as such is vowing to fight the new government until its collapse. New government officials reject the accusations, and Blue and White MK Chili Tropel says the new government will not push any laws allowing Netanyahu to avoid the High Court of Justice either. There are petitions against Netanyahu creating a coalition while under indictment, and speaking with Israeli Army Radio, Tropel says that if the courts decide to move against Netanyahu, then they will respect that decision, possibly even returning to elections. Blue and White will have veto power over most legislative and policy decisions, so this is a promise that Benny Gantz can stand on. Still, while acknowledging criticisms of the deal, Gantz says it would be unthinkable to go back to elections amidst the pandemic, and that they had to put the common good before their personal good. And 2/3 of the country seem to agree.
In other news, residents living just outside the Israeli settlement of Yitzhar are now condemning the Israeli government following the morning demolition of several illegal buildings there. 2 have been arrested for obstruction, as hundreds of Israeli security members have now demolished 6 structures in the outposts of Kippah Sruga, Tkuma, and Kumiori. And at least 3 of the buildings were serving as family homes, but all 6 had been built without proper permits, and 2 of the buildings had even been built illegally in Area B of the West Bank, which is under Palestinian control. The residents who built them, one of whom was arrested, believed that by building in Palestinian territory, Israel would not be able to intervene. But Israeli courts have ruled that Israel can demolish homes built illegally by Israelis, even if they're in Area B. And residents of the settlement, though, have condemned the demolitions, especially amidst the coronavirus pandemic. And legal activist Itamar Ben-Gvir now says that he's petitioning the High Court of Justice to stop demolitions in the future. Moving on, with Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day upon us, many around the world are also commemorating the Shoah. And one of the ways people do this is by visiting some of the most infamous death camps in Europe. But at what point do attempts to honor the victims cross into Holocaust tourism? ILTV correspondent Shanna Fuld traveled to Poland to find out.
How much money does Poland make off of Nazi death camps?
So far here, in Poland, about 200 euro.
Some €100. I was in a very nice hotel with my friend.
500 maybe zloty so far. Hotel's taxi. We'd booked the hotel before, but we just got a taxi here this morning. Just a bit of food and drink. That's it so far. Got 3 more days to go.
It's called dark tourism, and it's the retail of death and tragedy.
I don't want to give my money to a country that murdered millions of Jews and is now turning it into a profit-making tourism industry.
But it doesn't matter if some people feel they don't want to support the economy in Poland, because in 2019, more than 21 million tourists did, and 2.3 million of them visited Auschwitz. That's 11%. Former Nazi camps are turning out a profit off books, films, and tours, which all have a price. Statistics show the largest numbers of arrivals of foreign tourists were in Malopolski and Mazowiecki. It turns out these are also the provinces that house the Auschwitz and Majdanek extermination camps. Today, they're popular attractions.
It's good to come on holiday and not go on a beach. Something interesting, something you're learning about. So yeah, that's what we like to do.
Jewish-themed restaurants are all over Krakow, and taxi drivers we spoke with say 45% of people they pick up from the airport are planning to visit a camp. Here in Auschwitz, even using the bathroom costs money.
It was 1 zloty, which is pretty common in most places in Poland. A new company came in a couple of years ago and got the tender. They raised the price to 2 zlotys, which doesn't sound, that significant. But if you think that I think last year something like 2.5 million people, and assume that every company is going to use the facilities at least once, so you can do the math and see, what the growth and profit was. All 100%.
But former Polish Governor Janusz Zaleski says Poland is just providing a service that people need.
It is important to stress that this is not typical leisure tourism as going to the beach or visit attractive monuments. This is pilgrimage to extermination places, and it should be distinguished that even if there are benefits to tourism, they are connected from servicing pilgrims.
Meanwhile, tourists and money are pouring into these sites, but where is the money going? In 2018, the EU and Poland's Ministry of Culture and National Heritage sent over 1.4 million euros to Auschwitz to maintain the old theater for activities and the International Center for Education. And in 2019, London's mayor allocated £300,000 in a display of support for Jewish heritage sites.
Pilgrims, they need service. So it's not making money because of creating an attraction for tourists.
We pored over records from the Ministry of Tourism, but couldn't find an exact percentage point for how many come to Poland to see Holocaust sites. Museum directors refused to even meet with ILTV to discuss the topic of dark tourism and what the financial benefits to the national economy are. Which begs the question, how much is Poland profiting off the horrors of the Holocaust?
In other news, the annual Holy Fire ceremony has arrived, but to just a fraction of the typical crowds, as coronavirus lockdowns and social distancing rules keep the celebrations to a minimum.
بتختلف عن السنة الماضت لأنه كل سنة عن سنة هي بتكون أحلى وأحلى وأجمل. فهلا الفترة هاي بسبب الفيروس الوضع مسكر، الكنيسة مسكرة، الناس في بيوتها، فرح يكون صعب إنه الناس تحتفل في مظاهر العيد.
Every year as the Easter holiday comes to a close, tens of thousands of revelers, pilgrims, and tourists alike swarm the streets of Jerusalem at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to receive and follow the Holy Fire as it's carried to churches across the region. The fire is considered a miracle, and it represents the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But this year, with Israel and the West Bank under practical lockdown, only a handful of masked officials and clergy and worshippers flouting distancing rules were present to receive the flame from the Patriarchy.
زي ما بتشوف الساحة يوم زي هذا بتكون ملان الساحة بالحجاج القادمين من مصر ومن مختلف دول العالم للاحتفال بالفصح المجيد في بيت لحم. السنة مش موجودين، وزي ما بتلاحظ إنه الساحة اليوم هي ساحة فارغة من المحتفلين بسبب وجود الكورونا.
Still, the ceremony, small as it was, passed by beautifully and with nearly all traditions intact, bells above the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and all. Now for our final story tonight, a city in Israel is beginning to deal with a very interesting problem, and it arrived on 4 legs. ILTV's Nittany Manson has the scoop.
With weeks of empty streets, Israel's wildlife has found new refuge in territories that have long been developed and taken for human use. But city officials and residents in the port city of Haifa find themselves in a more unique predicament because it's not just wild birds, ibex, deer, and cats that are heading to the area.
קורונה בכלל, אנחנו רואים שהם מרשים לעצמם בכל שעות היום הם מגיעים, ועכשיו עוד יותר, כי אנשים לא מסתובבים ברחובות, הם מגיעים והם הופכים לנו את הפחים. אני לא מדברת על הניקיון של כל מה שקורה פה, אבל זה חוסר מוגנות, אנחנו מרגישים ממש לא מוגנים, מפחדים לצאת, אפילו לשפוך את הפח, אני לא יודעת מאיזה כיוון החזירים יצאו.
That's right, wild boars are taking over Haifa, and the big pigs pose a real danger to the city's inhabitants, especially as they become more and more brazen. Before the virus-imposed lockdowns, the wild boars would come through Haifa overnight, traveling in family packs and rifling through trash and private properties. But now they appear to have no fear coming out in the day.
Because of the corona, they become more and more habitant. They used to move in the streets without any disruption.
With the lockdowns easing, however, people will slowly begin filing out into the streets again. So we'll just have to wait and see if the animals are here to stay or if they'll be driven out by the returning traffic.
That's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. See you next week.